Hey Defenders, welcome back. So now that we have our architecture stood up, we have our Wazuh agents deployed, we have our Wazuh manager deployed, and we also have our elk stack deployed to give us our SIEM and host intrusion detection capabilities. Now your investigators have the ability to monitor alerts that are happening within your network and on your hosts. And which is great, but we can also take it a step further. And right now we're combining a more reactive defense standpoint, right? Like, so for example, something malicious would happen on a box. We would be alerted within Wazuh, but then of course the system wouldn't take any actions proactively, right? So we would see the alert come in, say for example, like backdoor detected or something like that, right? And we would then react to that, right? But during that time before an investigator reacted and got the host offline or whatever analysis they wanted to perform was done, that time frame could have resulted in the bad actor getting more persistence within your network, or malicious malware traversing from other hosts right through that network. So what we can do is we can take advantage of Wazuh's active response capabilities to give us a more proactive defense. So kind of what this will allow us to do is we can tell Wazuh and say, hey, if you see a rule fire that is, we'll say a brute force attack, right? Multiple authentications failed as a brute force attack. I want you to go ahead and block the IP address that is trying to log in to my boxes, right? It's obvious now it's not a legitimate user, and we don't want to give them more and more chances to potentially guess the correct password, right? So what is kind of happening under the hood is we still have our the main technology in play here is the Wazuh agent and the Wazuh manager. So what's happening, right, is we are receiving the logs from our Wazuh agent, right? So like if I on our agent here, so I'll have my agent on the left and then the manager on the right. If let me just go ahead and clear this out, and I'll tail the var log messages, and var log secure. And let's say, so now we see someone, since again this is open to the world, we see users trying to log in. We just see bots basically hitting this, trying to brute force onto our port 22, which of course is running SSH for remote logins, and we're seeing that here. So what the active response will allow us to do is, so now this log, right, the var log secure, is being sent to our manager, and basically our agent saying, hey, this IP address keeps failing a login, right? And while we get alerted on that in our dashboard, like what we see here, we can now, with active response, we can take the more proactive approach, and we can have our manager say, okay, let's go ahead and block that IP address. And in this demonstration on Linux, it runs a IPtables command to do so. So if you're not familiar with IPtables, it's basically just a local firewall that you can run on your hosts themselves. It's Windows has Windows Firewall and Windows Defender, but from the Linux perspective, we could configure IPtables to allow access to particular ports from particular IP addresses. We can only allow certain ports and disallow others to be accessed from the internet, right? So like since this is just the cloud service that I use to spin up hosts, if we run IP table, we can list out our IP tables here, right? And so we can see when I tell my cloud provider, hey, I want a Linux box. This is just what they have by default. And as we can see, to port 22, right, which is listening for connections, we allow anyone to come and log in, right? So if I wanted to, I could, and for if you're hosting servers within AWS, you want to limit only, let's say I only want my IP address to be able to log in to port 22 on this box. I could go ahead and write an IPtables rule that'll change the source address to my IP address, and now only my IP address will be able to log on to this box. And so what the Wazuh manager will now do is, when a particular rule fires, and we'll get into that configuration here in a bit, we'll dynamically create an IPtables rule for us to block an IP address or a user that is constantly triggering an alert, and we want to stop them kind of in their tracks before they have the time to potentially take over a box. So on the Wazuh manager, there's scripts, and one of them under the var osec. As I've said in the past, var osec is the directory where everything is held. That's Wazuh related. In the active response directory, and then in the bin, we basically just have a bunch of bash scripts here, and these allow us to trigger. Basically, active response will call these scripts to run. So, for example, we were talking about the IP tables, right? So for that, we will look at the Firewall Dropsh script, and as you can see, it's kind of a lengthy script. They have some if statements depending on your operating system that you're running. As you can see, you can also configure it for IPv6 if you're dealing with that as well. But this is all pre-done out of the box, which is great. You also have the ability to write your own scripts if you want. So maybe there's something here that you want your agents to be able to do that doesn't come bundled with Wazuh, and you also have the ability to do that and do that here. And then on the agents, this also exists. So if we go into active response, we go in to bin, we'll see the same scripts here as well. So our Wazuh agent will, it's constantly forwarding its logs to our manager. Our manager will see, whoa, this IP address has failed a login, in whatever our threshold will be, and we can set that here in a sec. And I want you to now block that IP address. So the Wazuh manager is going to tell the Wazuh agent, hey, go ahead and run that firewall-drop.sh script, and I want you to insert this IP address in it, right? And that IP address will pertain to what we were receiving in the logs. So let's kind of see if we can trigger that ourselves. So I mentioned a brute force attack, so let's go ahead and look at our rules, and let's search for like we may have to edit a rule here. Let's see, this could be a good one. Brute force trying to get access to the system. Let's see what the parameters are for this. So let's have a frequency of 8. So this needs to happen 8 times within 120 seconds. So 2 minutes here. 8 times. Let's say that's a little high for our liking, right? So what we can do is we can actually edit this guy. So let's change the threshold to a lower number. So we'll go into var osec rules sets into rules, and let's look at 0095. And so all of the topic for another video, but all of our default rules are within this directory, and we also have the ability to change those when if we need to, if we want to. But do keep in mind when you upgrade, your whatever changes will be erased. So that's why we update them in our other directory under local rules, right? But let's go ahead and look at what was the ID number for that. All right, so an ID of 5712. So let's go ahead and find that. So here we go here. And here we see the same settings, right? So let's say now I just want to change it to 3. So after 3 failed attempts within 120 seconds, right? So 2 minutes, I want this alert to fire, right? Which would be brute force trying to get access to the system. So let's go ahead and save this guy. I'll restart the manager. After every rule addition, you have to restart the Wazuh manager service. So we'll go ahead and restart that. And that's restarted. And so if we refresh this and reload this guy, we now see that the frequency is set to 3 instead of 8. So our rule change has taken effect. Okay, so that's good. So let's go back to our dashboard. And I'll just select this agent. And let's go into events. And so we see a lot of bots hitting this guy, right? So let's go ahead and add some active response to this. And to do this, so this will be done, this configuration will be made on the Wazuh managers. We could either, get access to the console, open up the osec.conf file, which is the manager configuration file, or, and that's totally fine. You can do it there. It's a little more user-friendly if you do it through the web interface. So we have the ability to do that here as well. And it tells you, it'll report back to you any like syntax errors or anything you make. So it's a little easier on the eyes and it's a little more user-friendly. Especially if you're kind of just starting to get familiar with it. So if we go into management and then go into configuration, we'll see the edit configuration that's in the top right up here. So we can go ahead and select that, and here we see the same file, right? So it pulls that back for us. And if we scroll down, we'll have a section called active response. So here we have that tag here, and this is just an XML file. So if you're familiar with working in that, with that, this should be familiar to you. We can also set global whitelistings, right? So I don't know. I understand the two local hosts, 888. I think that's Google's DNS by default. So I don't know. I guess they include that by default. You could remove these if you wanted to, and you could also add in your own either IP addresses or CIDR blocks or whatever you want to whitelist maybe like customers who are needing to access your environment, right? You could whitelist their IP addresses or IP ranges. So that way, even if they trigger a particular rule, right, like say like a login using non-existent user, since that IP address is within the whitelist tag here, they won't be blocked, right? So we can make those changes there. We then see the commands, right, which if you're familiar, which this should look familiar to you, so we can name them and then we give the executable, right? And we were looking at the Firewall Dropsh script, right? So here, so this is just listing out all of our scripts that we can currently run and call to perform an active response capability. And we can see that it's expecting a source IP. So what that means is if we look at the log here and load this guy out, it's expecting the data.source IP, right? So that is correlating to this guy here. So I've had some issues in the past where I had I bring in my own Mod Security, which is a web application firewall. They generate logs as well, and I pumped those logs to Wazuh and into Elasticsearch and Kibana, and I was having to do my own decoding to basically map the IP address to the source IP value here. So it's specifically looking for that. As of now, we don't have the ability to change that. So it'll take the value that it gets here and implement that within our firewall drop bash script here, right? So and so it'll take that variable and implement it within the bash script that's called, right? So thankfully that's all being handled for us, so we don't need to worry about that, which is nice. Kudos to Amit and Daniel from Wazuh. Thank you guys for doing this for us. So we'll pay our homage there. All right, so let's go ahead and make that configuration. And we'll come down here and we'll have our section where we'll actually set the active response within the active response tag, right? So what we can do is the first tag here, we're calling our script, our command or script that we want to run. And in our case, we're calling the firewall drop. A little side note, I guess you won't, the command name won't be the executable. So notice we don't have the .sh on our command name. We'll follow the value that's set within the name tag there. So just to avoid any confusion or anything. So we'll go ahead and say that's the command we want to run. Let's go ahead and add a location. In location, what we can do, there's a few different settings we can do for that. Let me see if they have within their yeah, here we go. These are options. So we have a few settings we can set when it comes to the location tag. We can do local. So this will run the active response on the server that that the alert was created on, right? So in this case, it would be our Wazuh agent. We can do the server, which would run the command on the Wazuh manager. So only the manager, that only applies to the manager, right? We can do the defined agent where you specify agent IDs, right? So the difference between that and like local would be any server within your environment would have the potential to run this active response, right? Where a defined agent would say, I only want, servers X, Y, and Z to run active response. Maybe you would define agents like your jump servers or bastion servers that those would be the servers you want to give the active response capabilities to. This it's a powerful technique and feature, but you can definitely cause network disruption, right? Business critical applications disruption. You can cause if customers are sending you, FTP traffic, if customers are interacting with some web applications that you give them access to, this potentially could cause outages for them. So this is something that it's very powerful, but it does need to be used with caution. And we can kind of control that caution with the defined agent, and then all would run the command on all agents. So only one server has to trigger this for all agents within your environment to participate in the active response, right? So you can see that they also say use with caution here as well. All right, and so for this example, I'll actually just use the local since I only have the one. But if you were to do define agent, let's just go ahead and do that. We'll do that for this example. So location, I'm going to do define agent. And so now I need to specify that agent ID, right? So we then have the agent ID that we need to add as well. So let's go ahead and add this tag as well. And my agent ID for this example is going to be 004. All right, so we'll add that, and we can then get to our rules. So rules are also grouped, right? You can do it by level. Rules have a severity level, starting from 1 being the lowest, 16 being the highest. So we could say, hey, I want active response to fire if any servers triggered a rule that was a level, 8 or above, right? So we could set that with this tag. We can say rule groups. Rules are all grouped together. So my, SSH login alerts are all grouped together into one. And so we could configure it that way to say, hey, if any rule within this group fires, now I want active response to happen. Or we can specify the rule ID, right? Which in our case, we'll just look at that particular instance of the one that we tweaked, which was 5712. So go ahead and remove this rules group tag, and here you see the tag that they've added. So they have authentication fail and authentication failure train. So for this case, let's just go ahead and add the rule ID of 5712. And then we have a timeout parameter that we can set. So so we can either be stateful or stateless, right? So we could say, we don't want to permanently ban somebody that triggers an alert, right? So say, okay, I want active response to be active. So in this example, I want that IPtables rule to be active for 700 seconds, right? And once 700 seconds has gone, their IP address is now removed from the ban list within IPtables, right? So that's what this setting is set to here. If you want to, you could also remove this option, and that would be a permanent ban, right? So anyone that triggers this, the IPtables rule is written, but that rule stays there and is permanent forever. It's never removed. So I'll go ahead and leave the timeout, and I'll just set it to 60 seconds for this demo. So a minute. Repeated offenders you can also do as well. So say someone's brute forcing our box, they get locked out for 60 seconds. After the 60 seconds, they then, once their IP address is removed from the IPtables ban, they immediately trigger the same alert, right? Well, so we call that a repeated offender. And so what we can do is then, okay, let's block that IP address and these values are in minutes. So now let's block it for 30 minutes. If it then happens again after 30 minutes, we'll block them for 60, and then we'll block them for 120. So with this, we have the ability to really slow malicious attackers or bots or whatever really down, right? And leave their window for potential, exploitation very small. And then we close the active response tag here as well. So that all looks good, and we'll go ahead and save this configuration. And as I said, any changes to this file, restart needs to be performed, so we'll go ahead and do that. We'll restart the manager here. And now that's restarted, we can go back into our dashboard, and we can go back into our dashboard and back into events, and let's actually get on the agent here, and within our logs, the Wazuh agent will output to, if we go into var osec logs, there's a active responses.log. So it'll also be populated within the dashboard of IPs that were blocked due to active response, and we'll see that here in a second. You can already see it in the background actually. So if we just go ahead and tail this active response.log, we can see that the Wazuh agent is running the script to add the IP address that triggered the particular alert, right? And in this example, the alerts were for all groups that belonged in the authentication failure and whatever that other one was. I just forgot. But and as you can see, so we get it populated within the active response log. We can see IPs being added, and then after that 60 seconds is up, you can see they're removed. And if we load IPtables, right? So let's go ahead and load that out. And if we scroll up here, within the, IPtables can get, you can make it pretty complex if you want. But here we can see the IP addresses being added, right, that are triggering alerts. And you can see they have the drop tag along with it, right? So dynamically, and what's great about this is, so if we also tail like var log secure, right, we can see people are failing with these passwords, and now these users are being blocked. So this guy coming from this address that's failed the password multiple times is now being blocked. So this is now handled for us proactively, right? So now without having any human or investigative reaction at all, right? These malicious actors and bots that are just spamming my agent here are now being dropped, and dropped as they should be. And this IPtables will constantly, be built and be torn down, right? And so here we can see a few more have been added as well. And if we, we also get these within our security events, which is great. So I'll go ahead and refresh, and we can see we have a rule fire that says when a host is blocked, right? We also see when a host is unblocked, right? So we can actually, let's parse out the IP address. So again, looking for source IP, right? So we'll go ahead and bring that out. And we can see that, okay, this IP address has now been dropped. A few of these, this one is now unblocked. So if let's just filter on this guy, we'll see two rules, right? So we'll see the host blocked, right? Because it triggered it the first time, then our 60 seconds expired, and then we unblocked it. But then it looks like he immediately triggered it again. So this looks like this is just some bot that's out there and is now being blocked for a longer time period, right? Because he's now a repeat offender. And so this, we could also build a dashboard off of these rules that details us, what IP addresses are currently blocked, which ones were previously blocked because they were attacking us in the past and now are unblocked, and is also a good way for us to verify. So say for example, a customer now starts complaining, saying that all of a sudden they can't interact with our application or send us messages or whatever our business is. We can then verify, okay, well, first kind of steps of troubleshooting is we can see, well, did they trigger a rule that triggered active response? And if so, are they still currently blocked, and do they need to be unblocked or maybe added to the whitelist grouping that we were looking at earlier as well? In this example, we just did a Linux host. For Windows, we also have a similar ability. If we go, or let's go ahead and look back on the manager. And CD in the bin here. And Windows uses the route null. So I think actually they have a detail about this. So they also have description here as well as to what these scripts are currently used for, right? So route null would add an IP to the null route. So this calls the route null command that's persistent on Windows boxes to be able to block IPs that are triggering a particular alert as well. And really the possibilities for this are endless. We have the ability to match on rule groups, rule IDs, severity levels as well. So it's a great tool to, some other use cases for this could be, say I have like a honeypot server deployed in my environment, right? And to isolate that in a way to where anyone could get to it, right? So if someone malicious were to get on the network and we're able to get a foothold on the honeypot, that's great. It's doing what we want it to do, but we don't want someone to be able to use a honeypot server to then attack other internal servers within our network, right? So we could write an active response rule that says, hey, if the honeypot server ever tries to SSH onto your box or send you a file, if someone tries to log in coming from the IP address of the honeypot server, we can go ahead and configure active response to disallow that automatically and then alert us on the back end, saying that, hey, someone's on the honeypot server and they're trying to move even more laterally within the network. Right, so that's just kind of a basic example. We'll look into building rules in more detail here in the next few videos. But active response is a great feature to be able to stop attackers in their tracks rather than giving attackers a 5-hour window, say, until your investigators get around or your networking team finally adds their IP address to the blacklist on the firewall or something like that, right? We can now take this into our hands and we're not having to wait on other parties to provide us this added level of security. Again, I will say use this with caution. I myself have caused some damage in my career using this feature. It's a very powerful one, but you do need to be careful about it and just make sure you're thinking it all the way through. But I appreciate you guys spending the time with me, and I look forward to our next video. And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.